Hey, welcome back to Stock Talk. So I do want to talk a few more minutes about ADX. I have some influences on ADX from different pros out there, and I thought I'd just give them some credit. So Charles LeBeau was really the first one that I studied his work in ADX. He's the guy who created the chandelier exit, but at the same time, he did some work on ADX I thought was highly relevant, especially with respect to the slope of ADX. Also, Linda Ratchke, I thought, has done really outstanding work. I thought her simple approach to using ADX is very powerful as well. And then also, Charles Schaap wrote a book called AD Excellence. I actually converted my settings to the settings that he recommended, which are 13 and 8. And I like that aspect of giving a quicker peaks and valleys for the ADX line. So using all those together in conjunction with MACD, which I had been using for 15 years already before I ever started using ADX, and then also my moving average environment, I've been able to kind of create my own way of looking at ADX. So today I do want to spend a little bit more time talking about that. Just wanted to give you a little bit more background, but let's go ahead and get into the agenda. And today I do want to talk about the slope of the ADX and how it can give you a little bit of an advantage at determining what kind of a pullback to get. Now, I'm going to show you how you could put up an additional moving average that can help with this. I actually don't use that on a regular basis, but I used to. And so it's a good thing to probably have on there for now until you get a better idea and start eyeballing it just freelance. But I want to make sure I show it to you, and then I also want to give you an idea of why the ADX slope can be very helpful at determining whether you're going to get a pullback all the way to the 18 MA. So let's go ahead and get into that. But first, let me just say that my services can be found at rabilstockresearch.com. I am still offering a special promotion for my product, and if you plug in the coupon code StockTalk, you can get the first 2 months for $50. The whole idea behind the service is to generate generate a lot of individual stock ideas. I do track the market. I talk about individual sectors, and I give a bottom-up approach to kind of my market opinion. But let's go ahead and get into our discussion on ADX. So I've got two charts up. On the left, I've got a monthly, and on the right, I've got the weekly of Rambus. And what I wanted to show is how I'm looking at the ADX and I'm looking at the slope. So let's just look back for a second. Notice how this was a low ADX environment, and then we broke out with strong green DI, and we have a ADX which is rising here. Now, the reason why that's important, and number one, because we're coming out from a low ADX condition, a lot of times you'll start a pretty powerful trend when you've been low for a significant period of time. It's like you've built up energy for a while. And when you break out of that, a lot of times you're getting a lot of people that haven't been watching a stock, and all of a sudden it's showing up on the new 52-week highs, and it shows a lot of resilience even during a pullback. And so there are times where I'm looking at this and I'm trying to determine, am I going to get a full pullback to the 18 as an entry, or do I have to do it at a higher level? And the way I determine that is look at the slope of the ADX line. Now, in this case, it's on a monthly, but I'll show you in a minute how I would look at it on a weekly the same way. So what I've done is I actually changed the moving average. I usually use a MA4. And the reason why I use the 4MA, for anyone who's wondering, is that represents the 18 on the next higher time frame. So it gives me just kind of a gauge of the shorter term, the next lower time frame. So it gives me a gauge of what the 18 is doing on the next lower time frame, and I can get an idea of whether that trend is up or down. So that's why I use the 4. But right now I'm using a 9, and the reason I'm doing that is because it's giving me sort of like the shorter term trend. In a lot of cases, when a stock is pulling back and it has rising ADX, you're only going to get a pullback to Really, it could be the 8 if you want to use an 8. It could be the 9 or the 10. I mean, a lot of people use different short-term lines. Any of those are totally fine. I just use the 9. It works well with the 18. And so what I'm doing, and I don't use this anymore. I kind of eyeball it now. I can just see if a stock's pulling back. And I'm looking at the number of bars. So if you notice, this has a 3-bar pullback. Red bar, and then a reversal bar. And I know I've had at least 3 months in this case of a pullback, and I still have a rising ADX, and it looks like I'm holding the 9 in this case. I'm more inclined to believe that that is the pullback. I'm not going to get a pullback all the way to the 18 because the ADX is rising. If, in fact, during this pullback, the ADX were going up and then it started to roll over, then I'm going to start to think that it's not going to hold the 9 and it's going to work its way back towards the 18. So I'm watching the slope of this ADX line really closely. And if I don't see it budging, even if it's rising and it's starting to lose its slope, that's okay. The only time it really is bothersome is when it actually turns down and kind of really rolls over. So just something to keep in mind during pullbacks, because let's say you like Rambus on a fundamental basis and you really want to get in this stock and you're sitting back saying, I want to really get a good entry, and you're waiting for a pullback towards the 18. Well, in this case, you would have missed that stock, and that can be the case when a stock has a rising ADX, especially when you're coming out of a big base. So just something to recognize. Now, let's go to the weekly chart. Notice we have another pullback here, and it holds the 9 in this case. But the ADX is actually low. Now, it's rising, but it's low. And so I still think it's relevant, even though you're not above 25, if you have the slope to the upside. This is where Charles Lebeau's studies kind of come into play. The slope for him was actually incredibly important. And something I started looking at, and I noticed that even below 25, if you have a rising ADX, you're still high probability that you're not going to work all the way back down to the 18 in this case. And that's preferable after you've gone through a 3 to 5 bar pullback. So just something, again, to monitor. And then what I would do is go down to the smaller time frames. Even on this pullback here, I'm not going to just do this entry off the monthly chart. I want to go down to the smaller time frame. And if we notice what happened, we had an ABC decline and ADX got really low during this pullback. So that to me is pretty attractive from that standpoint. Let's just look at another example. Keys on the monthly chart went sideways for 3 or 4 months and allowed the 9 to catch up. And ADX continued to rise throughout. And in this case, we actually had a sideways zigzag as opposed to an ABC decline. We did this kind of a zigzag consolidation, and then we had a triangle form, and it was actually in a reverse divergence where we made a higher low in price and a lower low in MACD. And in that case, I would be considering using the trend line break. ADX had actually held 25, so it was in a really powerful trend. So this is just another version of the same thing, but I'm keying off what's going on the ADX slope on the higher time frame. And then lastly, we'll just look at GM. GM actually had an ADX turning down last month. And so I'm more inclined to believe that this 9 was not going to hold and that we are going to come into the 18 in this case, and it's going to take a little bit longer. So just something to key on, something to watch when you're looking at pullbacks. Let's go ahead and look at some individual stocks and see if we can identify this and do some analysis on some individual stocks. Okay, so I have my 4 charts up again. For anyone new to the show, I've got the monthly in the bottom left, weekly bottom right, daily upper right, and then I have another weekly with the relative strength versus the S&P in black, and I use a 30-week moving average with the relative strength. So that's kind of the look that I like for analyzing stocks. And so I have the same look on these 3 charts, MACD and ADX on all 3 time frames with an 18 and a 40. So let's get going here. ALLE is the first stock, and actually it's a good example of what I've been describing during the lesson. So we had a strong move on the monthly, and see this pause of about 2 to 3 months. And notice how we had rising ADX through this period. Now, a lot of times when you make a big move, and sometimes it'll happen with a gap, you're only going to get a pause or a minor pullback because you're just too far away from the 18. And a lot of times it'll be right around the breakout area, which is what's happening here. So this pause is taking place around the breakout level. And then on the weekly chart, we pulled back towards the 18-week, worked off somewhat of the overbought condition. But notice how strong the ADX is. So real good sign here. And then you had a breakout around 143, 144, and now it's hitting new highs. So I think there's more upside coming, but I would say the interim target is probably, or shorter term target is probably somewhere around 151, 152, something like that. Just to be aware of that. But overall trend looks good, and I think you can stick with this as long as it's making higher highs and higher lows. AVY. So another stock that had strong and rising ADX through this period, and we did have a pullback. Notice how the 200 level held here. So very good sign when you see that, when you break through a big round number and then hold it. But we've got really strong momentum characteristics on the monthly, also on the weekly chart. And even on the daily, all the ADX on all three time frames is showing a lot of strength. The only thing I would tell you is this looks sort of like a V in the way it developed. It didn't really cup around. So I wouldn't be surprised if this checked back now that it tried to break out, maybe check back to the 18 again, or a little bit of support and just kind of work sideways before it's really ready to extend back to the upside. Let's look at TECH. So we had a strong trend on the monthly chart. So let's just look at this. So notice how during this phase here, this is where the monthly was in charge. We had an 18 and a 40 rising at about the same rate. We had pullbacks to the 18 on a regular basis. And then it didn't make it all the way back to the 18 and it started to accelerate. So at that point, we're looking at the weekly chart taking over from here. And you notice how the 18 and the 40 are rising at about the same rate. And we've had some pullbacks here. And now we just recently didn't pull back to the 18. So if this accelerates away, then the daily will probably take over as the trend time frame. So right now, I would say the weekly is in command. And if we get a pullback, that 18 is still really strong. As long as it holds the 18, it's in good shape. But if we start to accelerate away, then if you're going to play it, you're going to have to play it off the daily chart. Let's look at CRL. Now, this is actually another example of this, of what I'm talking about. You want to figure out what time frame is in control. And through this whole period, look at this period through here, the 18 and the 40 on the month, this was the time frame that was in control. And then we accelerated away from the 18 and stopped pulling back to it. And then from that point on, the weekly was in command. And look at how the 18 and the 40 are moving up at about the same rate. And now what's happening is the 18 is moving away from the 40 a little bit. Price is starting to accelerate, not pull back to the 18. Look at what's happening on the daily chart. We're getting pullbacks to the 18 with the rising 18 and 40. They look parallel. So this is in control now. And if you're going to play this, you have to play it off the daily chart. It's too extended here and it's too extended here. Now, I would also tell you that if we break the 18, that's probably a pretty big negative because we've gotten into an accelerated mode with the ADX on the monthly chart. Up around 60. We're up at 56 on the weekly. We're in a power trend on the daily chart. But again, if you start to accelerate away, then we're accelerating and extended in all three time frames. It just puts it in a dangerous position. So let's go to NFLX or Netflix, which is actually trying to break out here. Notice how long this took working sideways. You had a nice move to the upside and worked sideways to the 18-month, found support, and look at how the MACD was extended away from the zero line on the weekly chart, finally worked its way back down, and then started to find support. So I really like the looks of this. We're starting to emerge out of here. It's a little overbought on the daily chart to buy a breakout. You're too far away from the moving average. And we've made a pretty big move from like 520 all the way up here to break out. So Normally when I see that, when you break out from an overbought condition, you'll normally consolidate or something like that. If I'm in this, I want to stay long. I mean, no doubt. But if I'm looking to buy, I might look for some kind of a little check back or pullback over the next week or so for my entry point. But I would expect some pretty good follow through from this based on how long it's been going sideways. CBZ. Another attractive pattern. It's interesting, because we've had so many stocks that's showing some strength and getting extended from the monthly line. Notice how this is another one where the ADX did not roll over, and so we didn't get a full pullback to the 18. So these are just different examples, and these are stock requests. I'm not using these as examples. These are just stocks that are coming in. So we've got pretty good condition, but on the weekly chart, but we have dropped down on the ADX. The MACD looks like it needs a little bit more time. So my guess here is that this is going to check back to the 18 again before it's ready to break out. I think that would be preferable if this is going to break out the right way. I don't want to see something break out from an overbought condition, so it would be preferable if it consolidated back first before attempting that. But I do like the overall position here of the charts and the price structure. Let's look at UAA. So this is really the big picture pattern that I think is interesting, where you break the downtrend line and then you actually undercut this prior low, but don't have any downside follow through in reverse. So there really wasn't a great undercut and rally pattern because you didn't hesitate much. Once you turned back up, you just kind of took off. We're getting our first pullback now here. And so I think just based on the way this is developed, it looks like 26 is kind of key resistance. And maybe we're going to spend a little bit more time working sideways, consolidating a little bit longer before we're ready to take out that level up here. That's the key level for me at this point. I'd be watching for that. I mean, coming up through 25 will kind of be like an early warning sign if you can do that. But watch the volume action, watch the price action, because this does look like it's turning in a pretty significant fashion. THRM. Okay, so here's another example of a stock that made a strong move to the upside, had a 1, 2, 3 bar pullback pause, and it was such a strong move to the upside. We're not going to see a full-fledged pullback to the 18, but notice how the rising 18-month gave you a heads up. Now, if you put up, I have the 4 back up here, so if we had a 9, it came back right to the 9 area and bounced right off of that. So just keep an eye out for this. We had the pullback on the weekly chart. We didn't get all the way back down to the 0 line, but based on the strength of the rally and the fact that the ADX was low, you could have started to look for a new trigger just based on what was going on with the rising ADX. So now we've run up. I think this is headed up towards 95 to 100, something like that, as a target for this move. It's a little late to buy at this point. We're starting to get a little bit of volatility as well, so just kind of be careful from that standpoint about doing any new buying right here. Now, ECOM is interesting, and this is another example of what I'm talking about. I mean, I picked out this specific thing about ADX slope because obviously there's a lot of stocks doing this right now. Notice the rising ADX, and we had a pause going sideways here instead of a full pullback to the 18 months. So this is something you have to be on the lookout for on a regular basis. So we have pause for several months going sideways. You can really see it on the weekly chart. The MACD was overbought. It's worked off a pretty significant portion of that overbought condition. We definitely have a low ADX pattern in place, and we have low ADX on the weekly. Now, this is another one where the daily is kind of overbought trying to break out. So I would look for a little pause or handle or something like that to form to work off that overbought. That'd be what I would be looking for as a potential entry point. So something to watch for, but really overall nice pattern developing here. GNRC, strong move that has jetted away from the 18-month line. We are extended on the monthly chart. The ADX is at 74 on the monthly. Okay, now On the weekly, we had a really strong condition in place, and it's actually slowed down a little bit, but it's still strong enough to trend because it's above 25. The first sign that I want you to be on the lookout for in a stock like this is where the green DI drops down under 25, and then the blue line, the ADX, follows suit. If we get that, then I think you have to be on the lookout for a break of the 18-week. And so right now, the pullbacks to the 18-week are holding. Until that breaks, I think you want to stick around for this unless we start to see deterioration in the ADX. If that happens, then you got to be real careful here because of how extended it is. CORE. So I really like the looks of this monthly chart. We had this big kind of W pattern with a nice breakout, and notice how the ADX is rising right now. So the volume action is good. We've been pausing. We had about a 2-bar pullback and then undercut that and reverse. So not a long time, but we have spent some time consolidating, and the ADX does not look like it's anywhere near starting to roll over at all. Now, looking at the weekly chart, I am still inclined to believe that because the 18 was rising here and it kind of got away, you notice the distance was a little bit further than it was here. They're not really parallel. And when I see that, I start to think, okay, this is not going to just be a one pullback and go. It's probably going to check back again. So just kind of watch when you see the separation take place like that. A lot of times that creates a little bit of a W. It doesn't mean it's a topping pattern, but it does mean that there's a higher probability that you're going to sort of work sideways before you're really ready to take off again. So it's getting there. This is something to definitely keep on a watch list. I just don't think it's quite ready to break out. If I'm long this stock, though, if someone who requested this is long it, stay with it. I'm not saying that it's negative. I just think if you're looking to buy it, I think you get one more opportunity at a better price. Let's look at FUBO. So we had a big spike in price action with a kind of a climatic top up there, but look at the reading in the ADX. And then as we've come down and chopped around and consolidated, notice how red DI, I'm going to blow this up. I want to make sure you see this. So we came down pretty hard and we've been consolidating, but red DI has not been able to take over. It is still below 25. It never really got above 25 to any significant degree, and now green is on top here. So I do think that's a good sign. Now, what I will say is when you have a spike like this, you have to sort of realize that some people got caught holding the bag up here. So if we get a move to the upside, I'm inclined to be thinking 40 to 50 is the target in here, something like that. You know, somewhere in this range is what I'd be looking for. If I'm looking to play this, it's a little bit tougher because of that spike. I mean, is it possible to blow right through all that? Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I just don't think it's all that likely on the first try because you do have some people that got caught left holding the bag up there, and I think they'll take advantage of a rally. So just kind of be aware of that. But otherwise, it is intriguing the way things are playing out here. So Echostar is trying to turn things around. So I want to look at this in two different ways. First of all, on the monthly chart, we do have some resistance here. I mean, you can see 30, it's probably even closer to 28, something like that. We've got some problems it's just trying to work through. Now, and we still have a declining 18-month line. So we have rallied up and come down and tested the low and turned back up. Where that's showing up is on the weekly chart because I can draw in a trend line here. I can't really draw in this as a trend line. I mean, you could, but I don't think it's an official trend line the way I would do it anyway. These are really good retracements up and then go to a new low, a retracement up and then go to a new low. I mean, those are legitimate reversal points. So I can draw a trend line here. I've rallied up and then I came down and started to test. So from this point on, the key level for me is taking out this high right here. So if we take out that high, we are changing this trend based on the weekly chart. So we haven't done it yet. We came back and tested even better here. And now if we can come back up through this line, especially with some volume action, maybe some green DI breaking out, I think that would be a really good sign. Expect some resistance up towards this 35 area. That's kind of the next target area if it plays out that way. So I just wanted to frame that out. Let's look at IQV. Another stock that where the 18 on the monthly chart was in command, pulling back on a regular basis, and then it just took off. And now we're very far away from the 18-month line. And so right now, what time frame is in control? I mean, look at it. Look at the 3 time frames and you tell me. It's the 18 on the weekly chart. Every time we pull back to that, it's holding. It's almost acting like a trend line. And what you want to do is see if you draw on a trend line, and I can draw on this trend line now. We accelerated, right? We had one trend line here, and now we're drawing in a new trend line. Notice how it is the slope of the 18. I used to draw in thousands and thousands of trend lines, and now I realize that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, the 18 or the 20 does a really good job of providing me what the trend line is right now. So this is in command. If we stretch away to the upside and pop, then I think you have to be on the lookout for some kind of climatic activity, if the volume expands especially. But you want to be on the lookout for some kind of a topping pattern or distribution because this is getting pretty stretched away on the monthly chart. KFY. Pretty strong move. This is a little awkward the way it played out. I mean, the momentum characteristics are great. It's rising ADX on the monthly, a really strong reading on the weekly chart, and now we've pulled back. But it's just awkward because it tried to break out before it really went through a long enough correction phase, and you had this big bar with no follow through. And so in order to really convince me that it's going again, you'd have to wait for it to take out 75, and then it's not really good entry. So just kind of a tough one. I personally would pass on this if I'm looking to be a buyer. This would be one that it just doesn't intrigue me as much. But if I'm long this stock, I think I want to give this an opportunity to keep trending as long as it can stay above these lows down here. It hasn't done anything wrong. It's just a little awkward. You had this up move to the upside and then kind of a violent move to the downside. So I don't know. I'm a little leery about what's going on here. And so from that standpoint, I would be a little bit more hesitant about being a buyer. Let's look at SI. So this stock had a powerful move to the upside, topped out at this 175 3 times, and then came down pretty hard. But let's focus in on this red DI. This tells us a lot. When you go through a violent move to the downside and you're pulling back, what does the red DI do? Well, it doesn't even get above 25 here. So we've got a low ADX condition, but that's based on the selling strength. This big move to the upside was based on the buying strength. And so when I see that, I'm inclined to think that the bias is still to the upside. Now, I can see pretty clearly that this 125-ish area is kind of the level to watch. We do have a low ADX condition developed on the daily chart. So I want to see a breakout play on this time frame, preferably with a strong move to the upside. And so if that takes place, and I think we kick into gear again, now, expect some resistance up in this range up here if it plays out that way, but this could get pretty dynamic just based on the fact that the MACD is near the 0 line and ADX is low. That's all the time we have for today. Please send any stock requests to stocktalk@stockcharts.com. Feel free to reach out to me with any comments and questions as well. Have a great long weekend, and we'll see you next week.
Hey, Grayson Rose here with Stock Charts. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, consider giving it a like down below, maybe leave us a comment, and if you're new to the channel, you can subscribe at the link up above. We're gonna bring you daily content from an incredible collection of technical analysts and financial experts.